Oh, today I will show you the complete process of designing and building the NASA Supplies Hangar filming miniature for our film Splashback. Well, the first thing to do was to research some actual hangars to get acquainted with their look and design features. I collected some pictures from Google, and all of them had some good elements, but in the end I found a photo of some actual building in NASA, and I liked that look, so I decided to base my hangar on it and just take elements from the other pictures as well. As always, I drew the plans in vectors and cut all the parts on my beloved Flux Beambox Pro laser cutter. This building is basically just a box, so the way to make it look detailed is to have lots of textures on the walls. The engraving option provided me with the opportunity to etch different patterns like panels, gates and doors directly into plywood, giving the miniature a lot of detail. Another cool option was engraving based on the image. I created this black and white JPEG by combining various images of concrete panels, and then I could just tell Beambox to engrave it based on this image. It leaves the white areas untouched and uses the dark areas as a reference for determining the engraving depth. By the way, don't be confused by the fact that the engraved roof is on the inside of the building now. That was the test engraving and the actual one is on the other side. Alright, so as I'm building it, I'll tell you a bit about the reason for this miniature. So if you followed this series about our film from the beginning, you know of the character of George. And if you didn't, then go back and watch other videos on this channel because they are really cool. So George works in this NASA Supplies hangar, and he's not really happy about it. We wanted to make the hangar a visual symbol of his dissatisfaction with his work, so during storyboarding we envisioned a shot like this that would visually convey this idea. George appears small and weak beneath this looming architectural monstrosity that's pressing on him, right? So the colossal, almost comically oversized letters spelling supplies just underscore the fact that he's checking in here every day with little hope anything will change anytime soon. So the building should be a big, ugly, imposing piece of architecture, and as far as the design goes, all I had was this storyboard doodle to start from. I like the proportions of the building in the sketch as it filled the 4:3 format that our film is shot in very nicely. So now I'm first building a small prototype just to get a feel for the building in 3D space, and I knew that we could use this smaller scale in some of the wide shots that we will film. And after this, I'll build it in bigger scale. You can see I added some strips of plastic to bring some elements into the third dimension. 3D printed gutters were glued in a few places to additionally detail the building, as well as these doors and gates that I designed and 3D printed. I'll talk about these gates in more detail later. The hangar was then primed in dark grey color. It's always very satisfying to see the transformation from many different colors and materials into a unified whole. I decided to paint it the color of the NASA building in that picture I saw. It's the yellowish ochre color. The gutters got a coat of white to separate them from the facade, and the gates were painted blue. Of course, I could barely wait to start rusting it with my favorite rusting technique, dabbing the brown paint all over with a piece of dishwashing sponge, just lightly touching the model here and there. I even rusted the walls because I was having too much fun, but later I realized that it was probably built from concrete and it doesn't make any sense, so I was more careful with the bigger one. And then the small scale hangar was finished. I actually built two of them. And now it's time to do it all over again in bigger scale and with much more detail. The first thing I decided was that I'm not even gonna build the whole hangar, only the front side. That's one of the luxuries that storyboarding provides. You can see all the shots you need to film, and I knew it will only ever be seen from the front, so no point in building something that won't be seen, right? I spruced up the back side to make it stronger and ensure the thin plywood wouldn't bend on me. And then on the front side I added these strips to give it more dimension. Then it was time for texturing. I figured the hangar is built from concrete panels, so I wanted it to look like concrete. Anyway, I mixed some tile grout with wood glue and applied it to the walls. You could use plaster as well, but the grout had a rougher texture, which I liked. I textured it some more with the sponge and highlighted these lines between the concrete slabs. You know, anything to break the surface. These would be the gutters I made from a piece of wood and some 3D printed clips, again to break the gutter into smaller sections and make it more visually interesting. Obligatory dark wash gave the walls some wear and realism, and then it was time to start making the gates. I wanted to make a huge metal rusty gate that had a lot of character, so I again looked at some reference pictures and I liked this one the best. They were made of corrugated metal, which I can easily recreate with corrugated cardboard, and they have this wonderful metal bracing all over, as well as this small door. So I did a quick mock-up, and the one thing that I included that wasn't on the original doors were these windows at the top. All the bracing that was needed I first 3D modeled in Blender, then 3D printed and glued it on corrugated cardboard. This brown thing you see over the 3D printed parts is my self-invented technique for smoothing 3D prints. They tend to have these print lines over the surfaces, so I just mix a little bit of air drying wood filler with water to make it more milky and then brush it over the print. As it dries, it fills all those lines. So now that the gates were primed, I could take a photo with the hangar wall and do a quick test to see how it feels when the actor is added in. I showed it to Dino and we both felt that the guy is just too big and therefore the whole hangar looks too small and unimpressive. This felt much better and you could now really feel this building, towering over him. But now this door that I made was too big for him. So I ripped the big door out and replaced it with smaller door. This time I also added a big industrial fan over the door to provide more visual interest. And here's the wood filler technique in action. With the newly fixed gates primed, it was time to start throwing some color on them. I decided to use a gentle baby blue color, as it seemed it would work nicely with the yellowish tones of the hangar around it, even though it was pretty much pointless since the final movie will be in black and white. But you never know, perhaps in 20 years we'll go full George Lucas and start remaking our old films, and we'll decide to do a remastered color version or something, I glued the windows in, I made them from acrylic, and I engraved the grid pattern on them with the laser cutter so they would look like reinforced glass. Then it was time for dirtying up the gates with dark washes. A dishwashing sponge rusting technique was again utilized and rust was applied all over the gate. But it's always good to try and have some logic in these things, so I added more rust at the bottom of the gate as it would be closer to the ground and thus more prone to rusting or something. To make the rust more realistic, I decided to add the rust streaks, as if rain was carrying the rust down the gates and dirtied up the blue paint. I discovered that the best way to achieve it is to use yellow paint, add it over the rust mark and then drag it downwards with another slightly damp brush. It just looks so good. I mean, I wish everything in the world was rusty. Now I could attach the track that the gates are sliding on. I painted it silver first and then completely covered it in rust. I also added some of these lovely rust streaks on the top of the building, as there should be a huge metal supplies sign on the roof. Speaking of that sign, let's make it! The base construction was again laser cut and assembled, then primed, and finally painted a light grey metal color. You can see I added some wires and metal pieces in the bottom to make it more detailed. Then I needed the panel that the letters will be glued on. I figured in real life it would probably be made from sheet metal, so I glued pieces of paper on top of plywood. When painted, it tends to look pretty realistic. By the way, I had to make two interchangeable supply signs, one in its normal state and the other in a destroyed version, as in the movie it gets struck by lightning. The letters were painted white, evenly spaced and glued into their positions, and then dirtied up with a bunch of washes and rust effects. The burned one needed a lot of black paint to look properly destroyed, and I was just throwing paint on it and, doing everything I can to create the chaotic speckled effect. And the last thing this miniature needed was a piece of road in front of the hangar. I figured the easiest way to do it was to cut thin strips of extruded polystyrene, that's a hard word, extruded polystyrene, and glue them as concrete slabs on the floor. Now I'm quite aware that the roads are not made this way, but after all the texturing I'm going to put on it, it won't be noticed at all. The good thing about extruded polystyrene is that you can take a piece of rock and roll it over, push it, hit it, create all kinds of wonderful realistic indentations to make it look like asphalt. I laser cut a couple of storm drains and a manhole cover, cut out the polystyrene where they were supposed to go and glue them in. Next, it was time to apply a generous coat of grey paint to cover everything, and throw a bunch of black wash on it, of course. And sprinkle it with actual dirt that I collected from the side of the road many years ago during one hot summer that I spent on the island in the coastal region of Croatia. That's probably too much information, but it covers the road with real dirt and rocks, and although it might look a bit too bright now, once it gets soaked in diluted wood glue to fix it all in place, it will become the right color again. Yeah. And a bit more rust on the manhole cover. Isn't that a funny word, manhole? I like rusting manholes. Okay, where were we? The finishing touch on the hangar was adding its identifying number. I figured they would have many of these hangars in the complex, each with its own unique number indicating its purpose or function. And this one would of course be the hangar number 42, because one can never miss a chance for a small reference. And here's how the final miniature looked during our filming. I added some more details like dry grass on the road, these posts on the sidewalks. There's some kind of a boiler on the right and a fire hydrant on the left side. I really dig these signs above it, it just makes it realistic. The main gate got some signs as well, and these things just make the whole model come alive. And during filming I could easily replace the supplies sign with the destroyed one. So this is the raw shot, and this is how it might look in the end. Whew. Alright, that was it. Thank you for watching. And I thought I could end this video with a joke, so what did the janitor say when he jumped out of the closet? Supplies! No? Nothing? Tough crowd.